See, toxic people thrive on reaction. They feed off chaos, they want you emotional. They need you doubting yourself, they live in the cracks of your uncertainty. But the second you do this one thing, when you decide, I don't need your validation, you become dangerous to them. It doesn't matter if it's a coworker, a family member, or someone you've known for years. The moment you no longer play their game, you've already won. Because toxic people hate clarity. They hate peace. They hate when you stop explaining yourself. When you stop defending your boundaries. When you just say, this is who I am, and I don't need your permission to be it. They call you cold. They call you difficult. Too much, too little. Whatever version fits their narrative. But really, you're just not tolerating the manipulation anymore. And that infuriates them, because now the control is gone. Now the button they used to press, it doesn't work anymore. You want to disarm a toxic person, do nothing. Don't react, don't argue, don't over-explain, just detach. Because silence to a manipulator is louder than screaming. Boundaries to an abuser feel like a locked door with no key. Self-respect to the insecure feels like an attack. They hate it. Because you just became immune. You ever wonder why they keep poking? Why they say that one thing that they know will get under your skin? It's not random. It's calculated. Toxic people aren't chaotic by accident. They're strategic in their dysfunction. They feed off your reaction. Your anger, your confusion, your sadness. It's like fuel to them. The moment you raise your voice, get defensive, break down, or question yourself, they win. That emotional chaos, that's their playground, and every time you step into it, they tighten their grip. They don't need truth. They don't even need to be right. What they need is your emotional investment. They'll lie, twist your words, push your buttons, not because they want to resolve anything, but because they want to own the room. They want to own you. And if they can get you to explode, they get to point the finger and say, see, you're the problem. That's the trap. That's the setup. They weaponize your humanity. Your empathy becomes a vulnerability. Your emotions become ammunition. But here's what they don't expect. You not reacting. They expect the fight. They expect the apology, the begging, the back and forth. But when you just stop, when you don't play their game, you strip them of their favorite weapon, your energy. That's when their power starts to crumble. Because a toxic person without your emotional response is just a loud, empty threat looking for somewhere to land. And you're no longer the landing pad. They hate when you do nothing, when you don't react, when you just look at them with that calm, unreadable face and say absolutely nothing. That silence, that pause, that is power. See? Toxic people don't know what to do with stillness. They don't know how to handle someone who doesn't flinch. Because they're used to controlling the tempo. They throw the jab, you dance. They push, you chase. But when you stop responding, when you stop giving them that emotional spark, they lose their rhythm. And trust me, that drives them insane. They'll escalate, try harder, say more outrageous things, accuse you of being cold, distant, heartless. Why? Because they're trying to bait you back in. They need you hooked, not healed. Because the moment you disengage, the power shifts. They're no longer in control. You are. You're not arguing. You're not explaining. You're not even defending. You're just done. And nothing terrifies a manipulator more than someone who's done, but still standing strong. It's not about being passive. It's about being strategic. You don't waste your fire on someone who only wants to watch you burn. That's stillness. That's your armor. That's discipline. That's restraint. That's how you win. Not with noise, but with composure. Because when you stop reacting, you start rising. And when you rise, they lose. Every single time. The moment you set a boundary, the mask slips. Watch how fast the charm disappears. Watch how quick the smiles fade. Because toxic people don't respect boundaries. They resent them. They take your limits as a personal attack. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because boundaries expose their intentions. Suddenly, they can't manipulate you like they used to. Suddenly, you're not accessible on demand. And that threatens the one thing they want most: control. They'll say you've changed, that you're selfish now, that you're overreacting. But the truth is, you just stopped letting them walk all over you. You're not being aggressive. You're being clear. You're not being rude. You're protecting your peace. You've drawn a line. And they can't stand that, Because boundaries to a toxic person feel like rejection. It cuts off their access, it blocks their game. And without access, they can't operate, so they'll test you. Push back, try to guilt you into removing that line, but you hold it, you don't move it an inch. Because when you enforce that boundary, you're telling them, I see you. I see what you're doing. And I'm not playing anymore. That's when the shift happens. That's when you go from victim to threat. Because a person who honors their own limits is someone who can't be controlled. And that's what they hate the most. Confidence exposes insecurity like a floodlight in a dark room. The moment you walk in with your shoulders back, your head high, and your voice steady, the people who haven't done the inner work start to flinch, because your presence becomes a mirror, and they don't like what they see. When you stop second-guessing yourself, when you stop asking for permission, when you start owning your value without apology, toxic people feel it like a threat, because your self-respect highlights everything they're lacking. You're not attacking them. You're not belittling them. You're just standing in your truth, and that alone makes them uncomfortable. Why? Because they've built their identity around control, validation, and dominance. They rely on you needing them, on you shrinking around them. So when you stop doing that, when you start showing up whole and unshakable, you disrupt their illusion. They'll mock you, try to tear you down, throw subtle digs to chip away at your confidence. But those jabs aren't about you. They're about their own reflection. Your strength reminds them of their weakness. Your calm makes their chaos feel louder. Your clarity makes their manipulation more obvious. And that's why they come for you. Not because you're wrong, but because you're solid. You've become someone they can't rattle. And nothing threatens a toxic person more than someone who no longer needs their approval to feel powerful. When you detach emotionally, you become a mystery they can't solve, and that drives toxic people mad. See, they don't need your love. They don't even need your trust. What they crave is your reaction. That flash of anger, that crack in your voice, that look of confusion or guilt. They feed off it like oxygen. But when you go quiet, when you disengage not out of fear but out of choice, you cut off their supply. It's like locking a door they always assumed would stay open. And that's the shift. You're not fighting anymore. You're not trying to fix it. You're not even mad. You're indifferent. And for a manipulator, indifference is worse than rage. Because now they know you're done. Not temporarily, not for show. Fully, truly done. And they don't know what to do with that. Because your detachment doesn't give them a target to hit. You're not leaning in. You're not trying to prove your worth. You're just gone. It's not numbness. It's strength. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care about yourself more. You're no longer willing to bleed for someone who hands you the knife. You're not building bridges that only lead back to pain. You've chosen peace over performance. And that's stillness. That's silence. That's your liberation. Because the moment you detach, you become untouchable. And nothing unsettles a toxic person more than realizing they can no longer touch you. Not mentally, not emotionally, not at all. You don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. Not your family, not your friends, not the people who try to guilt, trip you into staying small just so they can feel comfortable. See, toxic people rely on your need to be understood. That's their leverage. They twist it, weaponize it, and keep you stuck in conversations that go nowhere. All because they know one thing: the more you explain, the more you give them to manipulate. And let's be real. If someone is committed to misunderstanding you, no explanation in the world will ever make sense to them. They'll just keep moving the goalpost. Today it's, you're too sensitive. Tomorrow it's, you're too distant. Then it's, you've changed. Of course you've changed. You had to. You finally realized you were explaining yourself to people who weren't listening. They were just waiting to respond. Waiting to twist your words. Waiting to gaslight you into thinking you're the problem. And the truth is, you never were. You're not difficult for having standards. You're not cold for having boundaries. You're not disrespectful for walking away from conversations that no longer serve your growth. But toxic people will paint it that way. Why? Because it keeps you talking. It keeps you justifying. It keeps you engaged. And that engagement is the lifeline of manipulation. They don't need the truth. They just need your attention. You ever notice how these conversations feel like quicksand? The more you speak, the deeper you sink. That's intentional. You walk away feeling drained, confused, and worse than before. Because it was never a dialogue, it was a performance. A psychological chess match where they made you question your own motives while they dodged accountability like it was a sport. And when you finally say, "I'm done explaining," that's when the panic starts. Not yours, theirs. Because they've lost control of the narrative. They've lost access to your energy. And they hate that. This is why clarity is so powerful. When you know who you are, you don't need to convince anyone else. When you're confident in your decisions, you don't need to argue your reasons. And when you understand your value, you stop trying to get people who devalue you to see it. That silence they hate so much. That pause after they say something outrageous, and you don't even flinch. That's not weakness. That's evolution. That's strength. That's you stepping out of the trap and walking away with your dignity intact. Because here's what they don't tell you. The need to be understood is often the leash toxic people use to keep you obedient. They yank it every time you try to stand up. Let me explain. Let me fix this. Let me make you see what I meant. No. Let them deal with their discomfort. Let them sit in the silence. Let them wrestle with the consequences of how they treated you. That's not your job anymore. Your job is not to carry the weight of other people's insecurities. And don't confuse silence with avoidance. There's a difference between being passive and being intentional. Walking away from dysfunction isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You're not ghosting. You're not running. You're choosing not to fight battles that cost you your peace. You're refusing to sit at tables where love is conditional and respect is optional. That's not cold, that's clarity. That's self-worth. That's what toxic people hate. They want you emotionally involved. They want you explaining, apologizing, negotiating your worth down to something they can manage. Because as long as you're talking, they're still in control. They'll pull every trick in the book. Play the victim, shift blame, bring up your past, create drama that forces you to respond. But the moment you decide that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, that's when they lose their grip. Because now they're shouting into a void, and the void doesn't echo back. You don't owe it to anyone to keep proving yourself. Not to people who have already made up their minds. Not to people who are only there to drain you. Not to people who weaponize your honesty against you. You've explained enough. You've clarified enough. You've given them more patience than they ever deserved. And if they still don't get it, that's not your problem. It's their limitation. And let's get something straight. Real relationships, healthy ones, don't require constant explanation. In a space of love, you don't need to defend your boundaries. In a space of respect, you don't need to justify your healing. The people who are meant to walk with you won't demand you stay broken to make them comfortable. They'll understand without you having to say a word. They'll feel your energy shift and respect it. They'll hear your silence and not panic. They'll honor it. But the toxic ones, they panic. Because they don't love you. They love the control they had over you. They don't want your truth. They want your compliance. And when they can't get it, they lash out. They'll tell others you're cold, distant, arrogant. They'll try to rewrite the story to make you the villain. Let them, because you know your truth. You don't have to defend what's already solid. You don't have to chase closure from people who wouldn't know what accountability looked like if it hit them in the face. You've already won when you no longer need to be understood. That's the freedom they can't stand, because that's when you start living for you. You stop shrinking, you stop performing, you stop handing over explanations like peace offerings. You realize your worth doesn't increase with someone's ability to comprehend it, and in that space, where your peace speaks louder than your words, you rise, you walk different, you speak different. You carry yourself like someone who knows they don't need to prove a damn thing, and toxic people hate that. Because they know you've stepped out of their reach. You're not the same version of you they used to manipulate. You've evolved, you've chosen yourself, and no explanation is required for that. None. You want to know what really breaks them, growth, not loud, not flashy, not for show, but real quiet, disciplined growth. When you start healing, When you start evolving into someone who doesn't need their approval, their drama, their chaos, that's when the fear sets in for them. Because now, you're stepping into a version of yourself that doesn't just survive without them, it thrives. You become something they never prepared for: independent, focused, and emotionally untouchable. See, toxic people don't expect you to grow. They expect you to stay stuck. They expect you to keep repeating patterns, stuck in the same loops of apology, over-explaining, and emotional dependence. That's how they keep their grip. But when you break the cycle, when you start showing up differently, they panic. You're not calling back like you used to. You're not responding with the same urgency. You're not playing the role they wrote for you. And that shakes them, because your growth exposes their stagnation. And here's the thing, they'll try to mock it. You think you're better now. Oh, now you're too good for us. They'll minimize your progress. They'll make jokes about your boundaries. They'll call your peace boring. Because if they can reduce your transformation to something laughable, they don't have to face the fact that you're actually doing the work. The very work they avoid at all costs. Because healing isn't cute. It's not a social media trend. It's sitting alone with your truth. It's holding yourself accountable. It's doing the internal cleanup without expecting anyone to applaud. It's choosing not to clap back, not to explain yourself, not to fall back into old behaviors just to keep the peace. That's the real flex. That's what toxic people can't fake. And that's what drives them crazy. Watching you build something solid within yourself while they're still running from their own reflection. They thought you'd always need them, that you'd always fold under pressure, that you'd always be available for the same arguments, the same patterns, the same roles. But now, you're emotionally self-sufficient. You don't need their validation to feel strong. You don't need their attention to feel seen. You've built that from the inside out. And when they realize they no longer have access to that part of you, the reactive, wounded, uncertain part, they know they've lost the power. And don't expect them to celebrate your growth. They won't. They'll resist it. Because your elevation reminds them of the work they refuse to do. Your evolution highlights everything they've ignored in themselves. You've become a walking contradiction to the narrative they built about you. You're no longer too emotional. You're no longer hard to love. You're no longer broken. You're clear, calm, grounded. And nothing is more threatening to a manipulator than someone who doesn't flinch under pressure. And maybe it hurts at first. Maybe it stings that the people you cared for the most aren't cheering you on. But you've got to remember, not everyone wants to see you heal. Some people only love the version of you that tolerated disrespect. Some only knew how to connect through chaos. When you want to hit a nerve, start doing well without them, not to prove a point, not to be petty, but because you finally realized your life doesn't depend on their approval. And the second you start succeeding, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially, they feel it. Trust me, they feel it. Because toxic people don't want to see you win, they want to see you need. They want you dependent, doubting, second-guessing, always checking over your shoulder to see if you're allowed to be proud of yourself. They want control, not closure. So when you level up without asking for their opinion, it hits them where it hurts their ego. And here's the truth most people don't want to say out loud. Some people aren't mad that you're happy. They're mad that they're not the source of it. When your success no longer includes them, it burns. Because your independence removes the role they created for themselves in your life. They can't play the hero anymore. They can't play the victim either. They can't keep you in that box they tried so hard to tape shut. Because now you're out of it, and you're not looking back. They'll say you've changed. You're damn right you have. You changed your standards. You changed your circle. You changed how you see yourself. You started investing in your peace, your boundaries, your goals. And you did it without needing their hand to hold. That's what makes them uncomfortable. You didn't ask for permission to grow. You didn't ask for their blessing to evolve. You just did the work. And now, the version of you they used to manipulate, that version no longer exists. You're not trying to prove anything. You're just walking in your purpose. You're showing up for yourself. You're choosing wholeness over approval. And when that happens, something amazing shifts. You stop chasing and you start attracting. You start pulling in people, opportunities, and energy that match the new level you're operating on. And the ones who can't meet you there, they fall away, not because you pushed them out, but because they were never meant to walk with you through the next door. Toxic people hate it when they can't predict you anymore. When you stop reacting the way they've trained you to react. When they push that same button and nothing happens. That blank look on your face, that calm breath you take instead of snapping back, that unsettles them, because now they don't have control. See, they study you, they learn your triggers, they memorize your patterns like a playbook, and every time you play your part, they feel in charge. But the moment you change the script, the game falls apart. They don't want a calm version of you. They want the version who yells, cries, explains, pleads, because all of that's power for them. That tells them they still have access. It tells them they still matter. But when you stop giving them that, when you become emotionally grounded, when your peace isn't shaken by their chaos, they panic. You've removed their fuel. You've cut off the electricity, and now they're flipping switches in the dark, trying to find the version of you they used to control. And that's the beauty of unpredictability, when it comes from a place of clarity, not confusion. You're not erratic, you're not unstable, you're just no longer operating from trauma. You're not dancing to the rhythm they created. You've made your own, and they can't follow it. They can't manipulate what they don't understand. They can't anticipate your moves, and that makes you dangerous in their world. You're not avoiding the conversation, you're choosing your battles. You're not afraid, you're just not emotionally invested anymore. That silence, that pause, that moment where you could react but don't. That's the moment they lose control, and it drives them mad. Because for them, control equals safety, and when they can't control you, they feel exposed. But this isn't about revenge. It hits them the hardest when they realize you never needed them to begin with. That all the times you stayed, all the times you tolerated the disrespect, the mind games, the back and forth, it wasn't because you couldn't survive without them. It was because you were still figuring out your worth. And now that you've found it, the game is over. Because when you understand that your value isn't tied to their validation, you become someone they can't use anymore. They told you they were the only ones who understood you. They made you feel like you'd never find better. Like you were too much, too complicated, too emotional. And they did that because it made you doubt yourself. They needed you to believe you were hard to love, so you'd stay desperate for their crumbs. But you weren't hard to love. You were just around people who couldn't meet you where you stood. People who were intimidated by your strength, but tried to label it as weakness. And when you finally walked away, not angry, not bitter, just done, they didn't know how to respond. Because they were banking on the idea that you'd come back, that you'd crack, that you'd eventually break down and need them again. But what they didn't expect was that your silence wasn't a break, it was a decision, a declaration, a turning point where you finally chose yourself, not out of spite but out of truth. You stopped explaining, you stopped proving. You stopped sacrificing your peace just to keep broken people comfortable. And that's what makes you powerful now. Because you realized you don't need them to heal. You don't need them to grow. You don't need them to validate your experience. You can validate yourself. You can trust yourself. You can rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more grounded than before. And they hate that. Because their grip on you depended on you doubting that very thing. The moment you knew who you were, when you finally understood that you were never asking for too much, you were just asking the wrong people. You set yourself free. You became your own source. And that's the one thing they can't stand. Because now, there's no going back. You've outgrown them, and they can't follow you where you're going. So now you know why they hate it. Why your silence unsettles them. Why your boundaries enrage them. Why your growth, your peace, your unshakable calm, it all rattles something deep inside them. Because it means they lost access. It means they no longer control the narrative. It means they can no longer pull you into the chaos and call it love. And when you stand firm in your truth, when you stop explaining, when you level up in quiet power, the game ends. Not for you, for them. You didn't become cold, you became clear. You didn't become distant. You became discerning. You didn't turn your back on people. You turned your back on pain. That's not weakness. That's mastery. That's how you win, not by fighting harder, but by refusing to play their game. And the moment you realized never needed their permission to walk away was the moment you stepped into the strongest, most dangerous version of yourself. And that is exactly what they can't stand.